to be kicking off Lawline's Wellbeing in Big Law Conference. Um, I'm a partner at Wigan and Dana in New York City. I practice IP law, and I've been at that about 20 years. But I've also been a mental health and well-being advocate. Earlier this year, I founded a project called Lawyering While Human, and so I'm their chief enthusiasm officer. I've got some big law experience in my past, so I think I'm qualified in some way to be kicking things off here. But I've also worked at boutique law firms, and I'm now at a medium-sized law firm. And I've got experience now. I'm a partner, but I used to be an associate, used to be a paralegal. So I feel like I've worn a lot of different hats in the industry, and by this point have some perspective on some of these issues that we're going to be talking about today. When I first discussed and made the decision to be really open about discussing mental health and well-being in the legal industry, so some of my own family pushed back, and especially as it pertained to big law. My brother, my sister came to me and said, big law is never going to change. It works well. People are making lots of money. It's a system that's been in place a long time. I wanted to say that I disagree with that. And the reason that I disagree with that is because in the end, there's a really strong business case for taking a real careful look at this issue. I think it cuts across so many things we do, including recruiting and retaining, and of course, the core of our business, serving clients. And I think at base, it's a really simple idea. Sometimes it takes some time for simple ideas to take root. But my perspective on it is that basically as lawyers, as service providers, what differentiates us and what we sell to our clients is our people and our people's brains. And so therefore it makes sense to me that if we support our people's brain health and well-being, we're going to be serving clients better, we're going to be better lawyers, we're going to be providing more value, and we're also going to be reducing costs, costs of attrition, costs of burnout, costs of recruiting. So I think the business case is really clear, and I'm glad that there's been a larger and growing conversation on this issue, and I'm glad that Lawline's been one of the leaders in that conversation. The reason I start with kind of these institutional issues, and I think there's an institutional issue, and it's a cultural issue, and it's a leadership issue, is because I think there are two fronts that we have to have this conversation on. The first is this sort of culture change front. The other front is the individual front. Like, what can we as lawyers, what can we as partners, what can we as associates do to navigate these issues? But I do want to say at the outset that if we only focus on the individual, I think that we're, in a sense, sort of blaming the victim. If we just focus on, go do yoga, go to the gym, practice mindfulness, and you'll be fine, I think we're putting all the attention on the individual. So I just wanted to say at the outset that there are these kind of two issues that are proceeding in parallel, and I think they're both really important. We're talking perhaps more than ever about all of these issues, and I think that that's a really positive thing. I think it's a great thing to be having these discussions, but it's not enough. And just to take a step back and frame, what the problem is, I think for all of us who have spent time in law firms, in big law, whether as associates or as partners now, I think we've all seen the numbers, we've experienced, what I would characterize as the problem. And I think that you can see it and understand it from a lot of different angles. The first is, of course, the statistical angle, right? And whether you look at the numbers, you look at the surveys, whether now or whether pre-COVID. And I want to emphasize that because the numbers have been not good for a long time. It's not a new thing that developed because of COVID. Perhaps, certain things were exacerbated, but this has been a longstanding problem from whatever survey you pick from whatever point in time. And that is that the legal industry has extraordinarily high incidences of depression, anxiety, burnout, substance abuse, stress, folks that say they have a lack of balance or a lack of happiness and fulfillment, and a lack of, to use the umbrella term, thriving. And I think this issue spans not just clinical mental health illness issues like clinical depression or anxiety or PTSD or bipolar disorder or any number of diagnosed disorders, but we're also just talking about mental wellness that and riding sort of the roller coaster of life. We've all just been through this pandemic. We understand life is stressful. People get sick. There are kids. There's family issues. There's relationship issues. Life is a complicated thing, and you layer work on top of all of that, and it's a lot to navigate. And so I think when we talk about mental health and wellness, we're not only talking about mentally ill health, but we're talking about mental wellness for everyday life, learning to navigate the stress that comes with being a human and with being a lawyer. I think you also get to this place when we not even just take a statistical view of it, but when we look at things like memes. I joined Instagram to keep an eye on my kids, and now I follow certain meme accounts in the legal field. One of them is Litigation God. There are lots of memes out there about associate life and how busy it is and how stressful it is. And, they're, hashtag funny, not funny. I think memes are interesting because they do capture some truth about the world and about, our existence. And I'll share one meme that I saw yesterday. It's a picture of a mouse with its hair standing on edge, looking extremely panicked and anxiety stricken. And the text is a friend saying to you, I feel like your personality is perfect for law. And the response by me, the lawyer, is, bro, thanks. It's a disorder, actually. So, not funny, but also, it shines a light on what's happening kind of in our field and how a lot of people are feeling. So, we obviously need to survive navigating through life, but we want to do better than that. We want to thrive. The World Health Organization defines mental health not as the opposite of mental illness, not as just not being mentally ill. It defines it as thriving. And that takes into account, how you feel in many aspects of your life. So that's why I want to kind of talk about this and frame this as, from surviving to thriving. Now, we talk about the problem a little bit, and I've talked about how this conversation is proceeding in our field. And, a very, very wise, close friend of mine, who I hope to marry someday, full disclosure, has said that, there are meetings about the problem and there are meetings about the solution. And I think it's really important that we not spend all our time in meetings about the problem. To me, meetings about the problem are, this elevated conversation that we're having about mental health, this whole issue of destigmatizing and making it okay for people to talk about this, especially in the workplace. And I'm not saying that's not important. It is important. It's super important to talk about that problem and to create a supportive environment. But at the end, when you're destigmatizing, we're still just talking about the problem. We're still just saying, okay, now we're allowed to have the conversation. So I think, to me, the next step is, well, what do you do then? Like, what are the solutions? What are the structural solutions? What are the policy solutions? What can we do as leaders in firms? What can we do as individuals? And I think that's really the focus of today, is on the solutions. So there's this there's this institutional piece that I mentioned at the beginning, right? What your firm is doing, maybe adopting the ABA pledge and putting in place a well-being program. And, there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of buzz about that. And I think it's very important that that not just be this sort of buzzy lip service thing. But on the second level, which is what I want to focus on for the rest of this brief talk, is the individual level. Like individually as associates, what can we do? I took a course this year. It's a course on Coursera called The Science of Happiness. It is now the most popular course in the history of Yale University. And that showed me that there's actually a science behind all this stuff. It's not just fuzzy, stuff that maybe a past version of myself may have dismissed as not for me. There's a real science behind it. Things like mindfulness, things like simple techniques and practices that we can integrate into our lives that make us better creative problem solvers. And things like resilience. It's interesting. It's not just a quality that you're born with or not. Resilience can actually be taught and learned. And I think that's really exciting because resilience is one of those things that we all need, especially those working long hours, stressful environments. So things like resilience, balance, learning healthy coping mechanisms, learning healthy communications practices, learning how to navigate stress, how to support yourself, and also how to support your colleagues and your team. And I think these are all critical skills as human beings, as associates in law firms and as leaders. So I'm excited that this is really the focus on the rest of today. And when I stop talking and turn it over to the rest of the panelists, that's really what they're going to dive into. And I have to say that the remainder of the speakers today include some of my favorite people in this space doing really, really high impact work. So just to frame what's happening next, the first session is going to focus on resources, right? What resources are out there? It's easy. I think there's a lot of noise. We're bombarded with information constantly, but to have sort of a curated list from people who are focused, on big law, on what works, on what's important. And so, Joe Milicic, Gavin Alexander, James Keshevars, all work at different, are wellness directors at big law firms, along with Amanda Branting from Lyra Health. I think that resources presentation is going to be really, really useful. And that's going to be followed up by James presenting on one of the issues I just mentioned, resiliency training. And again, I think it's so excited that this is learnable, that there are skills that we can integrate to really improve our well-being. And I speak from experience. I have integrated some of these practices into my daily life, and it's been really important. And frankly, I used to be someone who was really dismissive of it. So I'm excited for James' resiliency training session. Then Tracy Kepler is going to talk about perfect being the enemy of good, the issue of perfectionism. And I talked about sort of healthy coping mechanisms, but the lawyer type as being a perfectionist and what that causes and how to sort of counteract those tendencies, I think is a super interesting and important topic to think about and learn how to navigate. And then today's sessions are going to close with a dialogue. Like we have an evolving mental health dialogue. Like I said, it spans culture and institutional change to individual techniques. But in the end, like I said, I think it's pretty simple. As human beings, as lawyers, we all need to navigate this together. I'm glad that we're having this conversation about the problem. I'm more excited that we're getting to the conversations about the solutions. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the panelists. I hope everyone has a great day. And thank you once again for the opportunity to speak briefly to kick this event off.